We are live. Green flag drops on my home track, Richmond International Raceway this Saturday night, September 11th, under the lights. We leave Rocky Atkinson's home track in Darlington, and we head up north. It's hard to say you're heading north to Richmond, but that's what we're doing because we're in Richmond this week, and it's a doubleheader, Busch race at 2:30 Eastern, Cup race at 7:30 Eastern Saturday night. 2-for-1 special. One ticket gets both races. They're that desperate nowadays in NASCAR. I'm joined by Andy Lang, WagerTalk.com. I'm, of course, Steve Merril, WagerTalk.com, and Rocky Atkinson, SportsMemo.com. We're going to recap Darlington, and more importantly, we're going to get to some best bets and predictions for Richmond. I think one of the best tracks on the circuit. I'm a little bit biased, but it's a short track. It's the action track, the only 3/4 mile track, the only one of three that's under a mile, a very unique handicap. We're going to talk about that in a few moments. But before we do so, my man Rocky, his home track, Darlington, the Rocky recap for last Sunday's Labor Day weekend race in Darlington, the first of the playoffs, Rocky, and the H-Hat finally hit a winner this year.
Yeah, no doubt. It took a while, but Denny Hamlin finally got his first win of the season, and it came at a good time. First race of the playoffs. He's now locked in to move on to the next round. He just did hold off a hard-charging Kyle Larson, who did everything he could in the last turn to get to Hamlin. He got to him and bumped him, but he hit the wall and couldn't get around him, though. Exciting finish there, though, with those two. Ralph Stain, Martin Truex Jr., Kevin Harvick rounded out the top five. Kurt Busch, Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, Chris Buescher, and Austin Dillon rounded out the top 10 in Darlington. After the first race of the playoffs, Denny Hamlin sits in first, Kyle Larson second, Martin Truex Jr. is third, Kurt Busch is fourth, Ryan Blaney currently sits in the fifth spot, Joey Logano sixth, Kevin Harvick moved up to seventh from 16th, so a big move for Harvick there. Brad Keselowski 8th, Christopher Bell in 9th, Chase Elliott's in 10th, Eric Almirello's in 11th, and then that final 12th spot for the next round, Tyler Reddick and Alex Bowman are currently tied there. Kyle Busch is in 14th spot, 2 points out of the 12th position. William Byron, who's ran good all year, sits in 15th now. He's 9 points out of the top 12. And Michael McDowell, who I said to fade last week, he was the first guy out the race, he sits in 16th, 20 points out of the top 12. Should be an interesting race in Richmond Saturday night. Several of the playoff drivers were involved in crashes, including Kyle Busch, who was later fined $50,000 for his actions driving into the garage as he ran over cones and almost a couple of spectators.
That's okay, Dale Jr. Hey, the contact with the three, what's your take on that?
It wasn't the three's fault, so just take our lumps. We're running like shit, and we got wrecked, so it's what you get when you run like shit. It just shouldn't be there. I don't know what our problem is, but every time we go to sim and use sim and think we have a good sim session, we go to the racetrack and we suck. So I'm done with that, and we'll have to use some other tools on figuring out how to be good, but the M&M's Camry was not very good, and we're running terrible, and we got wrecked. It wasn't the three's fault.
I know the frustration is there, Kyle, but do you allow yourself to think about the next two racetracks where you're so good?
Who cares? Get what we get.
All right, Kyle Busch does have 14 wins at the next two.
Oh, just the poet of Kyle Busch there.
So get what you get.
It's the most obvious Stenhouse award for the week. I don't want to make light of him flying into the pits like that with his car that was destroyed. That was a very dangerous move. Runs over the cones. The fine was well deserved. Talking into a microphone doesn't really hurt anybody, but cussing on live TV and then insulting your sponsor and insulting your team and insulting your car manufacturer. I don't know. I feel like we ask athletes to be honest in the moment, and then they are, and we should appreciate it. So I got a laugh out of that. Wasn't laughing at flying through the pits, especially he had debris coming off of his car. Coming in like that, something could have come off the car and gone to the pit. So that was definitely no laughing matter. But the interview definitely gets the Stenhouse Award for the week.
Yeah, we'll see how it transfers over to Richmond. Kyle Busch has been very good at Richmond, one of the best drivers here for decades. And he's obviously one of the more emotionally charged drivers for decades. He's been keeping it cool in recent years, but it came out finally. And not a coincidence, it's the first race of the playoffs, right? He's a little bit behind the eight ball here. little bit more of a must-win situation for maybe him on one of his better tracks. And another guy, you know, as we leave Darlington in the rearview mirror here, another guy that had a lot of turmoil last week, he didn't really bring it up here on the show, but I thought maybe it could be a handicapping factor, was Denny Hamlin. You know, some personal issues came out on Twitter with him and his, I guess now wife. He'd been with her for years as a fiance, or, you know, live-in baby's mama, but obviously some problems there. And Kurt Busch, they put him on the new team next year with Bubba Wallace. So a lot of news comes out. It didn't distract Hamlin. As Rocky said, he gets his first win of the season. So we'll see if Kyle Busch uses that emotionally charged energy this week at Richmond. And we will transfer over to Richmond, but, you know, Darlington is a unique track, a 1.33 mile track because of the Rockies minnow pond. And Richmond's a unique track, as I said, as well, a 3/4 mile. It's the only one. There's 2 half miles, Bristol and Martinsville, a couple of Virginia/Tennessee tracks. But I really think Richmond races more like an intermediate track at times. And we talked about it last week. Darlington and Richmond, I'm starting to use them more as comparable handicaps. I don't look too much at Martinsville or Bristol, to be honest, with Richmond. And a lot of the guys that do well at Darlington recently have done well at Richmond. We had Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson, and Truex Jr. top 4 last week. They've all 3 been very good at Richmond. Ross Chastain, though, somebody I want to point out, finished 3rd. And would he maybe be a sleeper pick this week at Richmond? We're going to have our sleeper picks here in a few moments on the show. But before we do so, let's look at the usual suspects, a top 3 driver. I'll throw it to Rocky Atkinson, sportsmemo.com, to start things off for Richmond, the 3/4 mile action track. Rocky, who's somebody you're looking at this week?
Well, here in Richmond, we're going to look at track history, of course, as every track. And I'm going to look at track type. And like you said, it's kind of hard to compare this to Bristol or Martinsville. It's another short track like those. It's a little bit bigger, but looking more like Darlington and maybe a New Hampshire or a Phoenix, maybe a little bit, minus the banking, the flatness anyway. And also we're going to look at momentum. So who's got the best momentum right now, in my opinion? Denny Hamlin. Coming off a win, his first win of the year in Darlington this past Sunday, first race in the playoffs. He said himself he's not going to hold anything back these next 2 races. He's locked into the playoffs now. He runs good here. He has 3 wins, 14 top 5s, 18 top 10s in 29 races here in Richmond. Average finish is 9.0 at this track, which is second best among all drivers. He's led 1,911 laps here, which is the most among all of these active drivers. And over the past 3 years here in Richmond, he has 4 top 5s in those 6 races with a very good average finish of 6.8. So I'm looking for Denny Hamlin to be at the front again this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, Denny Hamlin, always a good pick. In fact, Gibbs Racing in general is a good pick. And I think I gave this story out earlier this year in April when we did the first Richmond race here on the show. But a couple years ago, I was at the fall race in 2019, this exact race 2 years ago. And I had done a Richmond radio show the day before. And they asked me quickly on the way out, 30 seconds, who do you like? I said, Gibbs, 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 Hamlin, Busch, Truex, any order you want. And they finished 1, 2, 3. And I remember my buddy and I had pit passes, and we're behind Kyle Busch's pit. He's leading the race with like 30 to go. And then all of a sudden, Truex Jr. passes him. He's all the way at the other end of the pits. And Joe Gibbs starts walking from Kyle Busch over to Truex's pit. We follow him the whole way, and he ends up winning the race. So, yeah, Gibbs is always good here at Richmond. Andy Lang, WagerTalk.com. Rocky started off with Hamlin. Give us someone else to look at for the top 3.
Well, I'm going to go with someone that there's probably going to be some value on because he's going to be off of everyone's radar because he wrecked early. That's Alex Bowman. You know, what are you going to do? You get in a wreck at Darlington, you have a terrible finish, you're going to be off of everyone's radar. The last 2 races at Richmond, he's averaged a 5th place finish. So this is a top 5 driver. He's in the playoffs for a reason. And sometimes when a guy has an early wreck that takes him out, you don't abandon him the next week. You come back and take him when you're getting 10, 20 cents of good value. So I would look at Alex Bowman as really good value in head-to-head and possibly some seasonal or daily fantasy.
Yeah, and of course, you mentioned top 5. He was top 1 in April. It wasn't necessarily the most dominant driver. He only led 10 laps, and he was 7th in stage 1, 4th in stage 2. He started 24th, though, keep in mind. So maybe a little bit misleading. Maybe he would have run a lot better had he not started 24th. In fact, the top 5 finishers all started top 8, except for Bowman, who was 24th and won the race. Denny Hamlin, who Rocky mentioned first, won both stages 1 and 2, started second, finished second, and led 207 laps. Truex Jr., another Gibbs driver who I mentioned I saw win the previous fall race in 19, led 107 laps. But Alex Bowman found a way to win, and obviously the 48 car and Jimmy Johnson found a way to win a few times. Not one of his better tracks, but Johnson also won here a couple times, I believe, over the years. Rocky, sportsmemo.com, Rocky Atkinson, give us a second driver to look at here for Richmond on Saturday night.
Well, I'm going to go with a guy who hasn't really been that consistent this year overall, but he did have a sixth-place finish this past weekend, Joey Logano. He has 2 wins here, 11 top 5 finishes, 14 top 10s, and 24 races here in Richmond. Average finish is a very good 10.4 at this track. And over the past 3 years here, Logano has 4 top 5 finishes in those 6 races with an average finish of 6.2, excuse me. So I'm looking for Logano to have a solid run here this weekend.
Yeah, in each of the last 2 Richmond races, Logano's finished third. He started second, finished third in the spring, led 45 laps there. I'm sorry, that was last fall, led 45 laps. His teammate, Brad Keselowski, led the most laps last fall a year ago in September and won that race. So Logano and Keselowski finished 1-3 last fall, and then Logano finished third again this spring, led 49 laps, which is actually the third most laps led this past spring. So, yeah, Joey Logano has been strong at Richmond. He's racing a little bit better, too, the last few weeks. We talked about him being a fade a few weeks ago, but I think he's in a little bit better current form, Andy. Who's somebody else you're looking at?
Well, I faded him. Now I'm going to support the other H, Kevin Harvick. He had a bad race earlier this year at Richmond, but finished top 8 in 10 out of the previous 12 races at Richmond. So he's got really good history at Richmond. He's always going to be up near the front. And I thought it was a really hard-fought race for him last week. Had a lot of adversity. There were a lot of times where he could have fallen back, or he could have, just said, well, forget it, we're on to the next one. But him and that team really fought hard and got rewarded with a 5th-place finish. And those are the kinds of finishes that I'm more impressed with, rather than, somebody that gets out and just has the right setup on the car. But a team that really, really comes together. It's the kind of finish where the team and the driver can get some confidence going. So, you know what? We could have been out of that one, guys, but we managed a 5th-place finish when we didn't have the car and we didn't have the right tools and we didn't have the right pit stop strategy. But next week, we got a track that we love. Let's concentrate on that. So I think Harvick is going to be top 5, and I think he's going to be there for the win. And we talked about Denny Hamlin. Boy, Denny Hamlin is now holding all the cards. He can go for the win. And maybe, if he's racing a guy like Larson or Truex or these guys that, he considers his top threats, he's going to do whatever it takes to try and get a win away from those guys. Why would you want to let Kyle Larson get the win and, get an easy advance? So I think you're going to see some really hard racing from Denny Hamlin, but I would expect to see Kevin Harvick up at the top at the end of this race.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Andy, about, Hamlin obviously has nothing to lose, but I like the angle you're taking there that, it's almost more important also that he doesn't let one of those top guys win, because then if something funny happens next week, they could potentially fall. I mean, a guy like Larson's pretty much locked in, I think, on points. He's not going to fall out of the top 12. But it's a good angle. We could use a lot of other guys that are competitive at Richmond or kind of in that mid-tier pack. Kyle Busch, for example, after the bad race last weekend. Kevin Harvick also. And Rocky, I'll give you credit. You stuck with Harvick last week, and I told you I was off the Harvick train after his lackluster showing at Michigan, where he swept last year and wasn't even competitive. I was done, even though Darlington was another one of his great tracks. But he was a lot better last week. Top 5 worthy. Definitely top 10 the whole race. And as you'd said last week, which I thought was interesting, he's actually been one of the hotter drivers the last month or so. And Richmond is a very good track. I've seen him win there several times. Rocky Atkinson, sportsmemo.com. Who's somebody else you're looking at to finish out your top 3 here for Richmond?
Well, I'm going to look at Kyle Busch here. He got wrecked last week, which he said it was their fault, but it been Austin's fault. I'm kind of surprised he didn't throw Austin Dillon under the bus there, saying he wrecked him. But anyway, he does have 6 wins here in Richmond, 18 top 5s, 24 top 10s, and 31 races here. Average finish is 6.8 at this track, which is the best among all drivers over the past 3 years here. He has 2 wins, 3 top 5s, 6 top 10s in those 6 races, an average finish of 4.3, which is tied with Martin Truex Jr. for the best during that time. I'm looking for Kyle Busch to turn it up a notch this weekend and, I know last year he didn't run good. This year he's run a lot better. But I'm thinking he's going to be really focused after that bad interview he did. I think it's just he's got to run good here, and I believe he'll do that.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind, last year we did not have practice sessions, and Kyle Busch was kind of the Kevin Harvick of last year, a cup, champion caliber driver that just wasn't quite the same. And he wasn't great at Richmond last fall. He started sixth, finished sixth, only was top six in one of the stages. But now he's got the April race under his belt. And keep in mind, 2 falls ago, that race I mentioned I was at down in the pits, yes, Martin Truex Jr. came back to win with about 30 to go, but he only led 109. Kyle Busch led 202 laps in that September race 2 years ago. So he has really dominated this track, and he's got some fire under him, to say the least, this week. So Rocky's going with a couple Gibbs guys, Hamlin and Kyle Busch. Andy Lang, WagerTalk.com. Finish out our top 3 look at the Richmond race here.
I was just thinking if Toyota and M&M's would like to come out with a statement and say, Kyle Busch is right. We've really been holding him back. So we don't want to stand in his way. So we're gonna let him out of his contract. We're gonna just get somebody else in the M&M's Toyota Camry, and we just feel so bad that we've held Kyle back, after that championship and everything. It's our fault. So Kyle, go on your way and go find another ride, buddy.
It's me, not you.
That could be. Yes,
hey, Andy,
right.
Andy, you and I were texting back and forth last week when that happened. I kind of joked, Joe Gibbs probably won't put up with a whole lot, and neither would these sponsors. And wouldn't surprise me any if you had Kyle Busch, Kurt Busch, and Bubba Wallace on the same team next year.
And Denny Hamlin. Eventually Hamlin maybe too. Gibbs might get rid of him as well. That'd be bad. The bad boys of NASCAR. That'd be a great marketing move. Can you imagine? Get Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch on that team. Wow.
Be the NASCAR version of the NWO wrestling faction. So, my last guy, I gotta go with Kyle Larson. Average finish the last 2 non-restrictor plate races is 2.5. And part of the reason I want to bring him up, I've never seen a move like what he tried to do at the end of that race. Just comes over the radio and says, "I tried to video game it."
Video game.
And the thing was, it almost worked. If Hamlin would have come down even just a little bit, Larson would have absolutely flown by him on the wall. I actually think Hamlin made the best move by staying up there as he did, but for Larson to just fly into the wall. Rocky, have you ever seen that before? I've never seen anybody floor it right into the wall like that. Have you ever seen that?
Not like that, no. Definitely was something new to me. Crazy.
He really wants it. I think we put that in the category of he really wants it. So anybody that drives like that and is finishing in the top 3 consistently, I'll take. I would like to put Truex in, but I just can't. I made a note. There were some surprises last week. Okay, Kyle Busch insults his team. We had a non-playoff car that was a top 3 car all night, which was Ross Chastain. Hamlin gets his first win of the season, and then, something that never happens, Martin Truex has pit stop issues. Like, oh, wait, that happens every race. I don't know why this team just keeps shooting itself in the foot. And he's so good. He has pit stop issues, and then he still ends up finishing in the top 5 when they have these issues. So if he could just keep it clean, he'd probably win. But I can't put my money on Martin Truex when they keep having these missteps. So I had him out of my top 3 favorites, and I had to put Larson in.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about Truex too. He hasn't been running quite as well the last couple months as he was early in the season when he got a couple quick wins. And I mentioned on the show last week, it's amazing how someone can dominate these tracks early in the season, and then you look at the next time they're there, just 4 or 5 months later, and it's a different animal. And that's what Truex did. Truex led 248 laps at Darlington on May 9th. He won stages 1, 2, and the race. He led 1 lap last week, even though he came in 4th. He led 247 less laps on a track he had dominated exactly 4 months earlier. So he's dominated at Richmond. He's led a third of all laps the last 6 races here, 32% of the laps. But, once again, that's been a couple years now. Is it the same? And by the way, Kyle Busch and Truex Jr. combined the last 6 races at Richmond have led over 50% of the laps, just those 2 drivers. So that's how strong Gibbs has been. Of course, Rocky mentioned both Kyle Busch and Hamlin. I'd have to mention Truex Jr., but I'm with Andy, though. Something ain't quite right there. So tread lightly, even though he's been dominant on this track. Rocky, sportsmemo.com. Let's throw it to you for a long shot. One of my favorite parts of the show here, a long shot, a sleeper, whatever you want to call it. These aren't necessarily guys we think are going to win. You know, obviously if they do, it's a huge payout often, but these are great top 5, top 10 picks, often at plus money. And then, of course, head-to-head matchup potential. And also all of our fantasy players out there. You need those mid-tier 6,000, 7,000 price guys to fill out the 6-car lineups. These sleeper long shots are great for that reason as well. Rocky, who's someone you're looking at Richmond that might surprise?
Going with another Gibbs driver here, Christopher Bell. I've seen him at 18-1. You might want to check that, Steve, and see what you're seeing it at. But he's raced here twice in the Cup Series. He has a solid 4th place finish and a 15th place finish for an average of 9.5. Puts him 3rd best in average finish behind Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin. And Bell won 3 of 4 races in the Xfinity Series here in Richmond in 2018, 2019. So he runs well here. It wouldn't surprise me a bit at all to see Bell running at the front this weekend.
Yeah, Rocky, I really like that pick for several reasons. First of all, 3 out of 4 wins Xfinity Series is huge. I mean, I think it does transfer over on this track more than others because it's a unique track. It's a 3/4 mile. It's a standalone. So yes, horsepower matters on the back straightaway between 2 and 3, but knowing this track is important. Obviously, Bell knows it, but then it goes back to my Gibbs. I mean, we just talked in depth about how great Hamlin, Truex Jr., and Kyle Busch have been. This is the 4th Gibbs driver now. So, yeah, I like that a lot. Eric Jones ran well in the 20 here. We've seen other guys in Gibbs run well. Kenseth back in the day got wins here with Gibbs. So love Christopher Bell. And maybe not a huge sleeper because right now I'm seeing him at 16-1 in some spots along with William Byron. And he's actually ahead of Bowman, who won the race in the spring, and right behind Harvick. So I think the odds makers are on top of it. But, yeah, still double-digit payout there and a great fantasy and head-to-head matchup play, Christopher Bell in the 20 car. Andy Lang, give me a sleeper, maybe a guy that's a little bit under the radar this week at Richmond.
Well, he was my sleeper last week, and I hesitate to go back to him, but I'll go back to Eric Almirola. He finished 6th at this track earlier this year, and they had the setup right on the car early in the race, and then they just faded. They got some damage on the car, and it just wasn't meant to be for Almirola. But Rocky and I both bet against Ross Chastain last week. I think you got to put Ross Chastain as a sleeper because I don't know what they did to that car. That made no sense. I mean, he was legit the best car on the track in the middle part. Rocky and I were texting back and forth. It's like Ross Chastain is literally driving through the entire playoff. Like all the playoff cars, he is driving right through, and he made a push at the end. He was right there for the win. An incredible performance. I don't know how they nailed that setup, but I think you got to give a shout out to Ross Chastain, and I don't know, maybe the team found some at the end. It certainly was a surprise, but Almirola, I like supporting guys who are in the playoffs who have something to race for.
Yeah, I think Chastain as a top 10 sleeper makes a lot of sense because he started 18th, finished 15th in the spring, but he had never finished better than 28th at like the 4 races before that had been 30th or worse in 3 of those 4. So a huge improvement. Also, he was a sleeper for me on most of the road courses this year. And Richmond, it's a short track. So you can make a little bit of a road course analogy still. It's a shorter track. And I think he's a solid driver. I think Chastain has a lot of upside. He's been getting better as the season goes. So we'll see how that transfers this week. Eric Almirola, by the way, he's on Harvick's team. One of my favorite sleepers guys for years until he retired was Clint Bowyer. I believe he even won a race one time. In fact, I was at the race. He won the race from 3rd, like on the last lap, and it was Earnhardt Jr. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Kyle Busch. I'd have to go back and check. It was like a decade ago. They basically took each other out with like 1 lap to go, and Bowyer from like 10 seconds back won the race. But Bowyer was always a sneaky top 5 at Richmond. Harvick's good, as we've talked about. So Almirola on that same team in the 10 car would also qualify. Rocky, just as good as a sleeper sometimes as a play against driver, especially for head-to-head matchups, and maybe you leave them off your fantasy team. There's some guys that struggle at Richmond, and I think I know one of you is going to probably mention because we haven't talked about him yet. Give me a play against guy here for Richmond.
Well, last week I used Michael McDowell, and he was, I think, his first one out to race. And if you played the head-to-head matchups there, you won it, all of them. This week I'm gonna go with somebody who's usually a little bit better of a driver, Ryan Blaney. His numbers here are real poor. He has no wins, no top 5s, no top 10s in 10 races here in Richmond. Average finish is 23.4. at this track. His best finish here is 11th. Over the past 3 years here in Richmond, he has an average finish of 18.8. And for whatever reason, he just don't run good here. And we'll definitely look to see who he's matched up with and see if we can get a possible fade play.
Yeah, Ryan Blaney has struggled at Richmond, and he's been open about it. And Andy, I'm going to throw it to you. I have a feeling. I don't know who you're going to use, but I have a guess who it might be because we haven't mentioned him yet. And it's another guy. It's a high-profile championship caliber driver, perhaps. Are you going to mention him as your play against, or do I get to do it afterwards?
Well, I actually have two. One is going to be in my head-to-head matchup, my free play. But the guy who's been a great fantasy driver, he's got to win this season. But Kurt Busch does not run well here. No top 10s in his last 6 races here. He's got 1 top 5 finish in his last 11 races at Richmond. And I bring him up because he's been a great head-to-head driver in matchups. He's been a lower-priced driver in fantasy and on DraftKings and FanDuel. Richmond just not been kind to him. Blaney's the big fade. Blaney's even open about being bad at Richmond. He doesn't even try and hide it. But Kurt has not had the results here. So if you're looking for a guy who has been consistent and you need a guy to fade, I would look at Kurt Busch, as he's been good all year, but I wouldn't expect much from him this week.
Yeah, and he's a championship driver, so that does qualify. And we're going to get to another championship driver when you're head-to-head matchup, because I know what you're going with in that one, Andy, and that definitely is my play against guy that you're going to mention here in a moment. Before we do that, though, Rocky, let's get to a free head-to-head from you. Once again, Rocky's at sportsmemo.com. Andy Lang is at wagertalk.com. Don't forget, Moto 100 gets you a full $100 off a full 1-year subscription. That Motorsports special is about to expire this month. It's your last chance to take advantage. Huge savings on an all-inclusive motorsports package. Andy Lang does both NASCAR and Formula One at wagertalk.com. And, of course, Rocky Atkinson, sportsmemo.com, specializes in NASCAR. He also does baseball, football, basketball, even a little hockey mixed in there. 2 guys you want to check out, wagertalk.com and sportsmemo.com. And Rocky, I'll start with you. You're going to have your best bets up this week. And, of course, it's a Saturday night race. Check back Saturday morning for his best bets for NASCAR. But as we head into the weekend, Rocky, give me a little sample. Give me a free head-to-head that you're looking at.
All right. I'm going with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. over Bubba Wallace weekend. Stenhouse hasn't won here. He does have 1 top 5 finish, 2 top 10 finishes in his 16 races here in Richmond. Average finish is 18.9 at this track. Over the past 3 years, he has 5 top 20 finishes in those 6 races. Average finish is 17th. His best finish here was 4th. Bubba, on the other hand, has no wins, no top 5s, no top 10s in 6 races here at Richmond. Average finishes 23.8 at this track, and his best finish here was 12th. So Stenhouse runs a little bit better than Bubba here. We're going to get back on the fade Bubba train and take Stenhouse Jr. over Bubba this weekend.
Yeah, Stenhouse is one of those drivers that does, well at certain tracks. He's always been decent at like Talladega, the restrictor plates we know. But Richmond, he does seem to run a little bit better, and it's a unique track. Some guys are good. Some guys like Blaney struggle more than they do elsewhere. So I think it makes sense. And by the way, that promo code is RACE100, RACE 100. It's a Moto Sports subscription. You go to MOTO Moto, you subscribe the package you want for the full year, you get a $100 discount with RACE100 for Rocky Atkinson, sportsmemo.com. Race 100 also works for Andy Lang at wagertalk.com. And Andy, of course, is the prop master. He specializes in props for all the major sports. NFL is probably the best of all. You don't want to miss his NFL props this weekend. College football is here as well. Basketball around the corner. He's also doing baseball still as we speak. Andy, let's look at a little free head-to-head. And this is my play against Guy, Andy, that you're going to fade in this free head-to-head matchup.
Yeah, we'll take Kevin Harvick. We talked about him earlier, and Chase Elliott is another driver to fade this week. 12th earlier this year, 5th last year, 13th, 15th. Not great over his career at Richmond, but here's the thing. Chase Elliott does not have a top 5 finish in his last 8 non-road course races. He's just not the same driver on road courses that he is on these other tracks. And I mentioned Denny Hamlin earlier. There are no road courses in this first stage, and Chase Elliott had a really bad finish at Darlington. If you're Denny Hamlin and you know that in the next stage there is a road course at Charlotte, Chase Elliott is a prime example of a guy you would love to get out of this first stage because they're going to go to Bristol next week. And if you can get Chase Elliott, defending champion, out before they get to the stage where he's going to be on a track that he's probably going to dominate, this would be a prime opportunity for, I don't want to say for everybody to team up against Chase Elliott, but boy, if I'm Hamlin and I see Chase Elliott as a chance to win, I would do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and also as far as an outright win, I'd run far away from Elliott because all he wants is a decent finish here. He can point his way back in, like you said, after Bristol next week, and almost be assured of probably getting a win in those last two stages. I mean, that's how good he's been at some of those tracks coming up. So he's going to play it safe. He's going to look for a top 10. So the head-to-heads with quality drivers that you could think could be top 5, top 7, I think are going to knock him out. He does have 3 top 10s in his 6 starts recently, so he's not as much of a play against his Blaney, but I think he's going to be very cautious, and he's been open. Him and Blaney are close buddies, and they both have said, we don't like this track. Quickly on the way out, guys, someone we kind of mentioned, but we didn't mention him directly for this race, was Austin Dillon. This is a guy that was just like Blaney and Elliott as a young driver. He really struggled here. He has come out and said in recent years that he really has a feel for Richmond now. It's one of his favorite tracks, and the results are showing that. He's finished top 10 now in 4 of his last 6 races in Richmond. Corey Andy, one of our viewers every week, I know he's been on the Dillon bandwagon at Richmond. He mentioned that earlier this year. So Austin Dillon, maybe someone we can call a sleeper, a guy I normally don't mention too much, and he's had some struggles. Obviously, he found a way to miss the playoffs with that mishap a couple weeks ago. We'll see how he does this week. Once again, recapping the free plays for those of you that are joining us, Rocky Atkinson, sportsmemo.com. He likes Ricky Stenhouse Jr. over Bubba Wallace. 2 play against guys often, but Bubba's the bigger play against in this one, and Stenhouse has been decent at Richmond. So Rocky's got Stenhouse over Bubba Wallace. Rocky, once again, will have his official best bets Saturday morning at sportsmemo.com, along with all of his football best bets. And, of course, Andy Lang, WagerTalk.com. Andy is looking at Kevin Harvick over Chase Elliott. Elliott's not been that strong at Richmond. Harvick has been, and Elliott's going to have to be caught. Cautious this week because it's not one of his better tracks.